Romantic interracial relationships between blacks and whites have existed for many years, even during the slavery era. When partaking in such a relationship was extremely taboo. The connotation put on such a relationship during the slavery era was quite negative. As society progressed past slavery, romantic interracial relationships between blacks and whites were no longer quite as taboo. For example, the abolitionist Frederick Douglass was involved in such a marriage even in 1882. Past and modern hip-hop culture can be seen as a great influence on the development of these relationships, quite positively, in the time that the culture has existed. However, many other factors before the development of hip-hop influenced today's increased acceptance of these particular relationships between blacks and whites, also such as the historic court case Loving v. Virginia. As seen in today's hip-hop culture, romantic black and white interracial couples are becoming increasingly more and more common and accepted, with figures such as Wiz Khalifa and Amber Rose, Ice-T and Coco, and many more. The connotation of romantic black and white interracial relationships and marriages during slavery is quite obvious. The offspring of these particular relationships were known as tragic mulattoes and were seen just as that, tragic. However, after emancipation, a slow but steady growth commenced until 1900. Interracial marriage was very provocative and aroused very intense passions that sometimes were expressed in state anti-miscegenation laws. These confusing and discriminatory laws prevented miscegenation, which is a mixture of races, especially marriage, cohabitation, or sexual intercourse between a white person and a member of another race. These ambiguous laws were a large issue that fueled the civil rights movement in the United States. Blacks and whites mostly thought of each other in a negative light and could not even understand one another. During this time, due to the rigid block society put in place between the two races, such as Jim Crow laws. Romantic interracial relationships and marriages were very difficult due to the racism and imagined differences between blacks and whites that society created. The civil rights movement successfully abolished these miscegenation laws with the famous court case Loving v. Virginia. The court ruled that miscegenation laws were unconstitutional, along with other laws that were not in accordance with natural human rights. Slowly, states started repealing their own miscegenation laws. Interestingly, it took until 2000 for Alabama to repeal their miscegenation law in their constitution. For the most part, during the time of this important civil rights movement in history, hip-hop culture was also taking root. After the civil rights movement, hip-hop took its root inside of an area that was corrupt and dangerous. There was violence between the white authority, especially the police, and the minority youth residing in the New York City boroughs, especially the Bronx. Gangs were forming at this time, with violence peaking between 1968 and 1971. Police were abusing their control in the city by mistreating residents, specifically the youth. Landlords, other authority figures in the city, turned a blind eye to taking care of their tenements, causing their tenants to live in unsafe environments. The Cross Bronx Expressway was also constructed, further breaking down the already unsafe environments that Bronx residents were living in. These disgruntled groups fought back with the creation of hip-hop. Youth now had a voice in the city, and they chose to sit down together to find a solution to the violence problem in a positive way. The gangs were finding peace in a place where the police could not. Hip-hop's purpose was for youth to find peace and to channel their energy into a positive medium. This also eventually involved the mixing of races. As the years progressed past the civil rights movement in the original years of hip-hop, many white youth were starting to become involved with hip-hop culture. They were being exposed to it through the mainstream, on television, and on the radio. This era in hip-hop culture is referred to as the Golden Age. It was not until the late 1980s that groups other than African American males began creating popular, innovative, and distinctive styles of hip-hop music. Racial tensions had eased for a short time since the civil rights era, and more groups were being included into hip-hop, especially whites. All that could identify with hip-hop culture could begin to identify with others like them, whether they were black or white. People dressed the same, danced the same, listened to the same music, used the same slang, and even partied in the same nightclubs. Races were starting to mix in a positive light, with hip-hop as the catalyst. As races started to mix in a positive way, especially blacks and whites, more and more marriages between the two races began to spring up. It is a valid point to mention that Loving v. Virginia was the base for the popularity of interracial marriages. However, the mainstreaming of hip-hop provided the extra push for the mixing of races. These two groups were able to identify with each other because of the common ground of hip-hop culture. Therefore, they were able to better understand one another. Despite Loving v. Virginia, interracial marriages have been seen to be very uncommon well into the 1970s. From the 1980s on, interracial relationships exclusively between blacks and whites have been growing steadily. In 1980, 0.3% of all married couples were black and white. However, most recently, in 2010, 0.9% of all married couples were black and white. These numbers may not seem important, but the number of married couples has been growing exponentially, along with the number of black and white interracial couples. As the number of marriages between blacks and whites increased, so did the public approval of the subject. From a recent Gallup poll conducted in 2007, more than 3 in 4 Americans say they approve of marriages between blacks and whites, similar to the results measured in 2003 and 2004. As recently as 1994, less than half of Americans approved. The vast majority of whites and an even larger majority of blacks approve of interracial marriages. Older Americans, regardless of race or ethnicity, are less inclined to support interracial marriages than are younger Americans, but still, older Americans show the majority support. Another very interesting long-term poll had been conducted about the attitudes of Americans toward black and white marriages from 1958 to 2007. There has been an all-around improvement of attitudes toward marriages between blacks and whites in this poll, and it can be correlated to the roots of hip-hop. There are many examples of black and white relationships in hip-hop culture today. Perhaps one of the most famous and loved black and white couples in hip-hop is rapper Ice-T and Coco. Ice-T is known for his infamous song Cop Killer that glamorized killing cops in the wake of the LA riots. He is a big player in hip-hop and knows his share of racial issues as he made a song that was the catalyst for the LA riots. Another famous hip-hop power couple that is black and white is rapper Wiz Khalifa and recording artist Amber Rose. As of late, they have been engaged since March 2012 and are pregnant with their first child. These couples are readily accepted and adored by the public in today's era. A rapper that has gotten some heat for putting interracial relationships in a negative light is Common. In a 2005 interview with Touch magazine, when asked about his opinion on relationships between blacks and whites, he said, "I don't think there's anything the matter with somebody loving somebody from another race, but it's almost like a stereotype that if you've got dreadlocks, you go out with a white girl. Just feel like, as black men, we do have to be aware that every time we step out with some woman, it's setting an example for our daughters, and it's also representing something for our mothers. If you can't really love your own, how can you really love others?" This view is not extremely unthinkable and is shared by some other people. Hip-hop critics today state that music is no longer conscious, meaning that it has no real significance. However, there is still music that has importance and divides into real issues that people are facing. For example, the song A Nigger in North Face by Legit follows a young black and white couple through their struggles with meeting one another's families and the lack of acceptance that they receive. Legit tackles a very delicate topic and does it very well. The video shows the most dramatic situations as possible with a black and white couple, but it does make quite a point. Also, the end of the video, where the girl kills herself because her father kills her boyfriend, is very dramatic, but shows the racial tensions that still exist. This situation is not representative of every black and white couple, but shows some attitudes that still exist from the past. As seen by these present tense examples of black and white couples in the music video, the attitudes toward interracial relationships is progressive and has improved exponentially since the monumental court case in 1968. But more importantly, hip-hop has acted as a catalyst for race relations, especially between blacks and whites. Hip-hop's events in history have correlated with events that have happened with development and increased acceptance of interracial relationships between blacks and whites.